What if the history we've been taught is only the cover story? What if the world we know was built upon the bones of another civilization, one far older, far greater, and far more advanced than ours? You and I have walked through cities lined with glass towers and steel bridges, believing we stand at the pinnacle of human progress. But when you step into the shadows of Europe's cathedrals, the great stone giants that rise from the earth like frozen symphonies, something inside you hesitates. You can feel it, can't you? That quiet, unsettling whisper that says, "We didn't build this." Tonight, I want to take you back, not just through history, but beneath it. Because under the neat timeline of human civilization lies something deeper, older, and infinitely stranger. Let's begin with a simple question. How could medieval builders, people with no electricity, no cranes, no digital tools, construct cathedrals so massive, so mathematically perfect that modern engineers still puzzle over their geometry? Each arch is flawless. Each vault supports unimaginable weight. Every stone chiseled and placed with a precision that seems to defy the limitations of the age. You look up at those ceilings and realize they weren't built to impress us. They were built to outlast us. Take the Cathedral of Reims in France. The official story tells us construction began in 1211 and ended roughly 80 years later. 80 years. Think about that. No power tools, no industrial machinery, just human hands, chisels, ropes, and horses. And yet what rose from that muddy ground wasn't a crude attempt. It was perfection in stone. Light filters through stained glass like a language only the gods could write. Towers reach upward, defying gravity, their spires like fingers clawing at the heavens. If you believe the textbooks, it's a miracle of human ingenuity. But miracles don't need logistics. Cathedrals do. And the logistics simply don't add up. Where did the stone come from? Where are the records of the massive quarries, the armies of masons, the endless lines of oxen hauling multi-ton blocks for miles? We can't find them. We can't even find the architects who supposedly designed these wonders. Names appear, John Dorb, William of Sense, but their lives are ghosts, their blueprints gone, their apprentices untraceable. It's as if history took their names and wrote them in after the fact, to hide something that didn't fit. And here's the first crack in the story. For every great cathedral, there's a legend of fire. We're told the new stone structures were always built on the ashes of old wooden churches, burned down just in time to justify rebuilding. Convenient, isn't it? Hundreds of cathedrals, hundreds of fires, a cycle of destruction and rebirth that feels less like coincidence and more like a script. Imagine this for a moment. A world wiped clean by something unspeakable. The survivors, few, lost, desperate, stumble across the ruins of monumental buildings they did not build. To them, these cathedrals must have seemed divine, beyond human comprehension. So they did what people always do with things they can't explain. They made up stories. They gave them timelines, invented builders, and folded them into the myth of their new world. But what if those survivors weren't the first humans, but the second? What if these cathedrals were not creations, but remnants? Because every stone, every vault, every mathematically perfect angle whispers of a civilization that understood something we've forgotten, something we can't even name. And here's where the real mystery begins. If these cathedrals were found, not built, then who were the real builders? What kind of world existed before ours. As we journey deeper into the evidence, you'll see that this isn't just about architecture. It's about memory. Because memory can be rewritten, but stone remembers.
If history is a story, then someone had to be its author. But what happens when the story begins to contradict itself? When the ink begins to bleed through the page, revealing something far older beneath? Every cathedral has a name attached to it, an architect, a supposed genius who, we're told, designed the impossible. Yet when you look for them, they dissolve like smoke. Jean d'Orbe, William of Sense, Peter Parler, each name appears in the chronicles like a flicker, then vanishes. No personal letters, no schools, no apprentices, no physical plans, just myths written centuries later by those desperate to assign ownership. It's as if history itself needed a scapegoat, a face to hide behind. Because if these men didn't build these monuments, then someone else must have. And that's the question the textbooks can't allow us to ask. Let's go back to the 1200s, the so-called High Middle Ages. According to historians, Europe's population was scattered across muddy villages, most people living in wooden huts, illiterate, ruled by superstition and hunger. And yet, we're told that at the very same time, they were constructing massive stone giants that required mathematical precision, astronomical alignment, and an understanding of stress dynamics we only rediscovered centuries later. It's like imagining cavemen launching satellites. Now ask yourself, who drew the first blueprint? Who calculated the angles of those Gothic arches? Who decided how to distribute the weight of hundreds of tons of stone so perfectly that these structures still stand after 800 years? The chroniclers stay silent. The math doesn't lie. Even the supposed master builders are riddles wrapped in contradictions. Some are credited with designing buildings separated by hundreds of years. Some are said to have lived impossibly long lives. Others appear across continents, working on projects that overlap in time. They're not people, they're placeholders. Signatures added later to fill blank spaces in a history that couldn't explain its own artifacts. But here's where it gets stranger. Take a look at early photographs from the 1800s. These black and white images show cities filled with enormous stone structures, cathedrals, arches, castles, already ancient, already weathered, already sinking into the ground. And yet around them, life seems primitive. Dirt roads, wooden carts, farmers. No signs of construction, only occupation. It's as if the people of the 19th century didn't build their cities, they simply moved into them. In image after image, the same pattern repeats. Towering architecture, surrounded by new settlers living at a fraction of that sophistication. No scaffolding, no cranes, just people existing beside ruins too perfect to have been made by them. It's almost as if humanity re-emerged after something catastrophic, something that wiped the slate clean and left behind a world half buried in its own forgotten grandeur. A reset. And perhaps that's why our official timelines feel so forced, why history books rush to fill every gap with convenient legends. A fire destroyed the old church, the architect's records were lost, the dates are approximate. It's the language of patchwork, the sound of a story trying to hide its missing chapters. But if you listen closely, there's another pattern, one that connects these monuments not through faith, but through design. Across continents, separated by oceans and languages, the same symbols appear on the stone. The griffin, the sun disk, the flower of life, the spiral. Different cultures, same signature. Coincidence? Or evidence of a single civilization, global, unified, erased? You can almost feel them watching us through the stone. The architects who never existed because they didn't need to. Their work was already here when we arrived. The question is no longer who built them, but what happened to them. Because somewhere between the 13th century and the dawn of modernity, something enormous occurred, something that shattered the continuity of civilization and forced humanity to start again, small and blind among the ruins of gods. And that's where the mathematics come in, the one thing we can't lie to. Numbers do not believe in legends, they only reveal truth. And when we run the numbers, the story collapses.
If truth hides anywhere, it hides in numbers. Stone can be carved, stories can be rewritten, but mathematics, cold and merciless, never lies. And the cathedrals whisper through geometry. Let's begin with what they call the sacred ratios. The great cathedrals of Chartres, Amiens, Cologne, each constructed with proportions identical to the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, and the angular alignments of planetary orbits. Not approximately, exactly. Their foundations align with the solstices. Their rose windows mirror the positions of the constellations during equinox. Even the spacing of their columns echoes the frequencies of musical notes, a harmony of architecture and sound centuries before modern acoustics was invented. But who, in the mud and plague of medieval Europe, was calculating celestial mechanics? Who encoded astronomy into stone when most of humanity didn't even know the Earth revolved around the sun? Let's look closer. When modern engineers digitally modeled the Cathedral of Chartres, they discover something astounding. The entire structure acts like a resonant chamber, a massive instrument tuned to the frequency of the Earth's electromagnetic field. When Gregorian chants fill its halls, the vibrations amplify at precise wavelengths, creating standing waves that can literally alter human brain activity. People standing inside report feelings of euphoria, revelation, transcendence. Coincidence? Or technology disguised as devotion? Because this is not the only one. Across Europe, Notre Dame, Salisbury, Reims, Milan, every great cathedral hums at a similar frequency. And those frequencies are not random. They form a pattern. When plotted on a global map, the cathedrals align along energy meridians, what ancient Chinese geomancers called dragon lines. It's as if the builders had access to a planetary grid, a network of energy points stretching from Egypt's pyramids to England's Stonehenge, to India's Kailasa Temple, to the Andes of Peru. A network so precise it could only have been mapped from the sky. So either medieval peasants somehow rediscovered geodesy, sacred acoustics, and astronomical engineering simultaneously, or they inherited something they didn't understand, a blueprint from a forgotten age. And that's where the real conspiracy begins. You see, in the archives of the Vatican, buried in what's known as the Secretum Apostolicum, there are references to a vanished set of manuscripts called the Codex Lapidum, the Book of Stone. It described, according to 17th century copies, how the ancients sang matter into form, using vibration, light, and sound to shape stone without tools. No hammers, no chisels, just resonance. Those manuscripts disappeared in 1798, the same year Napoleon's troops invaded Italy and allegedly confiscated objects of unknown origin. Some believe that technology, or its remnants, was quietly taken, studied, and hidden again under new institutions: Freemasons, Jesuits, Royal Societies. The lineage of secrecy was reborn. Because if the public ever learned that these cathedrals weren't built by human hands alone, that they were reactivated remnants of an older global science, the narrative of civilization would fracture. Religion, history, identity, all rewritten overnight. But the truth leaks through cracks, as it always does. In 2018, researchers studying residual electromagnetic anomalies beneath Chartres discovered that its foundations extend far deeper than official records claim, descending into chambers that predate Christianity by thousands of years. Stone columns older than Rome, aligned with the same star positions as Egypt's pyramids. The cathedral wasn't the beginning, it was the end of something ancient. And the geometry confirms it. Every major cathedral across Europe fits perfectly into a geodetic pattern that forms a spiral across the continent, a spiral whose origin point sits not in France nor England, but in the Atlantic Ocean, right where myth places Atlantis. Is it a coincidence that Gothic, the very term used to describe these structures, comes from Goetic, meaning of hidden knowledge? Or that every doorway and window forms the same repeating pattern of sacred geometry used in ancient temples across the world? We keep calling them houses of God, but maybe they were houses of something far more literal. Machines built to harness the pulse of the earth itself. And perhaps when those frequencies changed, when the planet shifted after whatever cataclysm erased that earlier civilization, the machines went silent, the music stopped, the memory faded, and we were left staring up at stone giants, worshiping them without ever knowing why. But if that's true, if these cathedrals are remnants of a pre-human technology, then we should still be able to find echoes of their purpose, hidden not in faith, but in power. And that brings us to the next question. Who knew this, and who tried to bury it?
History doesn't just forget. Sometimes it is taught to forget. And the deeper we look, the more we find a strange continuity between the keepers of the old world and the architects of the new. Because knowledge doesn't die, it migrates. It moves like a shadow from one secret hand to another. When the Roman Empire fell, the Church rose, and with it came a systematic gathering of every ancient manuscript that survived the collapse, not to preserve it for all, but to conceal it from most. From Alexandria to Constantinople, from the burned scrolls of Serapeum to the sealed vaults beneath the Vatican, an invisible thread connects those who decided what humanity was allowed to remember. By the 12th century, right when the first Gothic cathedrals began to appear, Europe was emerging from what historians conveniently call the Dark Ages. 1,000 years of silence, no progress, no innovation, no records. Then, suddenly, overnight, geometry, metallurgy, lens crafting, and complex architecture all reappear fully formed, as if someone had turned the lights back on. What changed? The official narrative says contact with the East. The Crusades brought new knowledge, new science, new philosophy. But hidden among the returning knights were whispers of something else, something older than Jerusalem. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. You know them as the Knights Templar. They returned not with gold, but with blueprints. And within decades, Europe was covered in cathedrals, one after another like signal towers relit after centuries of darkness. Chartres, Reims, Notre Dame, Canterbury, each one positioned with uncanny precision, each one built by mystery guilds that left no trace of their origins. Those guilds later evolved into the Freemasons, men sworn to secrecy, obsessed with geometry, symbols, and the preservation of the light. Coincidence or inheritance? Because when you study their symbols, the compass, the square, and the all-seeing eye, you realize they are not metaphors, they are instructions, architectural keys to a science long lost. Every lodge, every cathedral, every obelisk they built carried the same geometric code, a harmonic blueprint. And at the heart of that blueprint lies the same ratio found in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Parthenon of Athens, and the layout of ancient Teotihuacan in Mexico.
different eras, different continents, same math, same mind. So who was that mind? Some say the Templars found not treasure beneath the Temple of Solomon, but records, tablets written in an unknown language, maps of the earth before the last flood. They didn't invent Gothic architecture, they translated it. They were reviving the technology of resonance, the science of the lost builders. And that perhaps is why they were erased. In 1307, on a Friday the 13th that still echoes through superstition, the French king and the Pope conspired to destroy the Templars. Thousands arrested, tortured, burned, their property seized, their archives vanished. But you cannot burn geometry, and you cannot kill memory. The survivors scattered across Europe, carrying fragments of that forbidden science into Scotland, into Switzerland, into secret societies that eventually shaped modern nations. The same societies that later built the cathedrals of finance and government, domes, arches, columns, echoes of the same sacred architecture that once tuned with the earth. You see, it was never about religion. It was never about kings or conquest. It was always about preserving the frequency. Because those who understood it could harness it. They could use vibration, architecture, and magnetism to control not only energy, but consciousness itself. And the cathedrals? They weren't just temples. They were machines of awakening. Standing wave generators designed to synchronize human emotion, aligning entire cities to one harmonic state. That's why worship inside them feels different, transcendent, otherworldly. The architecture engineers emotion. The church told us it was divine presence. Maybe it was engineered resonance. Over time, that resonance was lost, diluted, replaced by ritual and repetition. The science decayed into symbolism. The priests forgot the equations but kept the gestures. The sound remained, but the purpose was gone. And yet, in every Masonic tracing board, in every cathedral carving, in every illuminated manuscript, the old symbols remain. The rose, the vesica piscis, the spiral, the cube within the circle. Messages in plain sight. Not superstition, blueprints. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. The ones who still guard this knowledge never left. They simply changed the facade. The bankers, the technocrats, the architects of digital cathedrals, all inheritors of the same idea that structure controls vibration, and vibration controls reality. We call it the algorithm. They once called it the word.
Imagine for a moment that the stones could speak, not in words, but in memory. Every vibration that ever passed through them, every chant, every whisper, every earthquake, every prayer. All of it stored in their crystalline lattice, like grooves in a record. The cathedrals are not monuments. They are hard drives of the ancient earth. You can feel it when you walk into one. The silence is thick, heavy with the echoes of something older than faith. Your footsteps fall in time with the rhythm of the vaulting arches, the geometry guiding your senses without you even knowing it. You are inside a code, a resonant equation built not to be understood, but to be experienced. That's why the cathedrals were never finished, because they were never meant to be. Each was designed to evolve with time, to adapt, to absorb, to remember. Every addition, every restoration, every vibration fed the structure's living frequency. And now, centuries later, we've forgotten that the stones are still humming. Modern sensors have started picking up strange anomalies inside them. Low-frequency electromagnetic pulses repeating in cycles. Some believe it's geological, the earth breathing through the limestone. Others suspect it's something else, an echo reawakening as the planet's own magnetic field begins to shift again. Because if these cathedrals were truly tuned to the pulse of the earth, then they are not dead relics. They are reactivating. Maybe that's why people feel drawn to them again, not out of religion, but out of instinct. Something in us recognizes the pattern. Something buried in our DNA responds to the resonance of the stone. And maybe that's the final truth the architects knew, that memory is not kept in books, but in vibration. That when humanity forgets, the earth remembers for us. You see, our entire civilization may just be a reboot, a second attempt after the first one fell. We walk through the ruins of an earlier world, mistaking them for miracles of our ancestors, when in fact, they're messages left behind by beings who wanted us to remember what we lost. They did not build temples to gods. They built instruments for humanity's awakening. But the awakening is dangerous because it breaks control. That's why the old orders hid it, why they built religions around it, why every attempt to rediscover it, from the Templars to the alchemists, from Tesla to the so-called fringe scientists of today, was ridiculed, suppressed, or erased. The keepers never vanished. They simply rebranded. They replaced stone with silicon, vibration with signal, resonance with data. Our new cathedrals are not built of limestone. They are built of code. And once again, we kneel before them, eyes glowing in the light of digital stained glass. The same architecture of control, reborn. But here's the paradox. For all their effort to hide the past, they can't stop the stone from remembering. The resonance is rising again. People are waking up, asking the same forbidden questions. Who built these cathedrals? What were they for? And what did they know that we've forgotten? Maybe the real secret isn't who built them, but why we stopped building like them. Because those cathedrals were more than stone. They were proof that once, long ago, humanity, or whatever came before us, was not divided by race or creed or language. It was united by frequency. A single global harmony. A civilization that understood energy, geometry, and consciousness as one continuum. And when that harmony shattered, so did memory. What we call history is just the silence that followed. But the stones, they're still singing. And if you stand very still, truly still inside one of those ancient halls, you can almost hear it. A low hum, deep and eternal, like a voice calling from before time, not asking to be worshipped, but to be remembered. Because maybe the cathedrals were never about faith in God. Maybe they were God's faith in us, a message in architecture, waiting for the next civilization to listen again. And now that we are finally listening, the question is not who built them, but whether we are ready to rebuild what was lost.